Welcome to the Money Rules Podcast, where we tackle your personal financial matters with leading financial advisors. Your host, Boitumelo Ntsoko.
Tertiary education is a dream that many parents want for their children. However, the costs associated with higher education can be daunting, and financial planning is crucial to ensure that your child's university journey is smooth and financially sustainable. But what happens when you've left saving for university fees to 2 years before your child starts? Is it too late, or can you still devise a plan to manage varsity expenses? Joining us on this episode to discuss this is Devin Card, who is a certified financial planner at Crew Invest. Welcome, Devin.
Hi, Tumi. Thanks for having me. Always good to be here.
Planning for university can be a stressful endeavor for parents. What are some of the key financial challenges families typically face when preparing for their child's higher education?
Yeah, good question to me. So some of the key challenges that many families chase would boil down to a couple of things. The main one being the drastic change that often occurs in tuition fees. Now, obviously, it does differ from family to family, depending on what high school your child's in and what varsity that they're going into. But generally what we see is it's quite a large increase in fees and other expenses that come along with tertiary education once your child moves into varsity. And then, of course, adding on to that is the big risk of inflation and rising costs. I think a lot of South Africans are experiencing that at the moment, that the general cost of living and the cost of everything around us is going up at a alarmingly high rate every year, and it's becoming more and more difficult to forecast what those expenses are going to be, even in such a short period of time, like 2 years. And then more on the financial planning side, one of the biggest challenges is that most families fund education for their children through their general monthly income. And this is going to have a massive impact when all of a sudden there's a big jump in costs, and not only to fund the tertiary education itself, but how that impacts the family as a whole. Something like, saving for the parents' own retirement. So, it's just some of the big challenges that a lot of families face when preparing for tertiary education.
Now, 2 years is pretty late to start financially planning for a child's university expenses. What are some of the initial steps parents should consider during this period?
Yeah, so that is quite late. But first and foremost, just to kind of put anyone's mind at ease who is going through that scenario, that we have to remember that your child is part of your budget from day one. So it's not like they're costing you nothing, and it's just a bit of adjustment and planning that needs to go into place when moving from high school into tertiary education. So there are some steps that we generally advise people to take into consideration when planning, especially short notice. And first and foremost, that's to assess your current financial position. And what I mean by this is not to just look at your balance sheet, like your assets and liabilities, but to look at your financial plan holistically. So that includes your balance sheet, your income expenses, your potential shortfalls you currently have for your retirement. If you have any other medium-term goals, how are those potentially going to be affected? And it's just to give you a good overall picture of what we call your financial health before something like tertiary education comes along and has a big change on your financial situation. The next step would be a little bit more specific, and that would then be to dive into the budget. And I'm sure many individuals out there who've engaged with financial planners are probably sick of hearing about budgets, but this is where it starts. It's so difficult to plan if you haven't put a budget in place. And when we talk about a budget, it's not putting in the line items of what you think the costs are going to be and just associating various premiums and numbers to these costs. But it's to actually go through, a 3, 6, 9 or 12-month cycle of what your actual income and expenses have been, to really get a deeper understanding of what your budget currently is. And that's going to help you set realistic goals. Because once you have a clear understanding of your budget, you're really going to be able to give yourself insight into what is possible in such a short term like 2 years, and maybe answer the question whether saving is even an option. You have to live and pay certain bills, and saving might not be an option, and it's going to have to be other decisions that you're going to have to make in order to make tertiary education a viable option for your child.
Devin, now understanding that each family's financial situation is unique, could you maybe outline a general roadmap for parents during these 2 years leading up to university enrollment?
Certainly. So, I mean, I'll definitely point to the subjects I just mentioned above, and point one would be to obviously, assess that financial position that you're currently in, and put a budget in place, and then it would be to have a plan. So 2 years is a short term. So there's certain things people need to understand when planning for the short term and you're considering saving or investing. So it's obviously, once that plan is placed, then it's about understanding what that journey is going to look like over 2 years, and just being more aware of what certain things like market volatility might do over 2 years if you're looking at investing. Being aware of what products you're currently invested in, or what products you're looking to invest or save in as you start this 2 year journey, because certain investment products might be not appropriate for planning this 2 year short term goal when funding for education. So it's definitely a bit of a tick box exercise, and that's to assess the financial position, put the budget in place, have the plan, and then really understand what that roadmap looks like over the short 2 year stint once your plan is in place.
Devin, could you maybe give us examples of investments that would work for parents during this short-term period?
Certainly. So it's difficult to give advice in isolation, but I can speak quite broadly and generally in terms of investment structures that don't work. And that would obviously be something like a endowment structure or a retirement annuity. Obviously, saving in your retirement annuity as a parent, you're only going to be able to access those funds when you turn 55 anyway. So that's definitely not going to be appropriate for saving towards a tertiary education in 2 years. In endowment structures, obviously, it is dependent on the individual themselves, but they tend to have restrictive periods, especially in the first 5 years, that, again, not appropriate for the short term. So it would be your general unit trust money market funds, tax-free savings accounts that are probably your most appropriate investment vehicles when you're looking at storing some funds, whether it's saving or investing for the short term.
Scholarships and financial aid can play a significant role in alleviating university costs. When should families begin researching and applying for these opportunities? And do you have any advice on how they can maximize their chances of success?
Yeah, so look, obviously, if they're 2 years out from tertiary education or university, I would definitely say start now. It's never too late to explore those options. And I would say my first piece of advice would be to not assume that there isn't a scholarship out there for your child, or one that's appropriate to them. We're often led to believe that scholarships are only there for your top academic students or your top sportsmen. So I would say definitely do your research. Try and understand what scholarships are available at all the varying varsities or colleges or universities. Use your research engines online. The internet is a great tool nowadays to understand what your options are. And then once you know what's available, then just have a diligent application process. Typically, when it comes to scholarships, there's some barriers to entry. You want to make sure you've read the instructions clearly. You're applying. Your application is appropriate and in line with the scholarship that you're applying for. Meet your deadlines. Proofread your applications, and then especially if you're under financial pressure to make tertiary education work for you and your budget, you always want to make sure you demonstrate the financial need for the scholarship, and that's where your financial plan comes into play. If you've done your planning properly and you can demonstrate there's a financial need, the university is always going to lean towards those who need it more than those who don't need it.
Devin, earlier on you touched on budgeting. Obviously, the idea of saving for university when managing day-to-day expenses can be overwhelming. What practical budgeting tips or strategies can parents implement to strike the right balance?
It's a great question, and I want to deviate away from your typical tips and tricks of budgeting and more in line with the topic at hand of budgeting for your child's tertiary education. I would say the most important thing to be open to is communication between you and your children when it comes to your financial plan and budget. Often what we find is that parents want to shelter their children from any financial pressures that might be in the household, and they believe they need to do whatever they can to ensure that they put their child through tertiary education. And often what happens is that this is to the detriment of the parents' medium and long-term financial planning, where they have to put off their own savings or potentially go into debt that they have to pay off over the years, which ultimately leads to them needing to work longer, or one day even being dependent on their children. So I would say the biggest tip is to include your children as soon as possible and show them what the budget looks like. And what you find comes from that is that when you help them understand that it's not a case of they can have everything. It's a either or situation, where if they want to go to a university, but it's going to take a bit of tightening of the belt as a household, you might find that they might be willing to give up certain things themselves. All the extras that the parents are paying for. If the budget needs to be cut, get them involved and ask them what they're willing to sacrifice in order to fund that tertiary education. So yeah, I definitely think that yes, we could go through all the specific tips and tricks of a budget, but the biggest one would be getting your own children involved early and really work through it as a family to see how best you can make it work.
As we approach the final months before a child's university journey begins, what finer details should parents pay attention to regarding financial readiness?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, because it's one thing to do all this prep, and then as we get to deadline day, all of a sudden we hit with unexpected costs or penalties, etc. So I would say in terms of financial readiness, the most important thing to look out for would be those deadlines and how much is needed to pay on specific dates for tuition fees, because typically if you miss those dates, then there's fines or penalties associated with that. And that's just an unnecessary sunk cost when it comes to funding tertiary education. So you want to make sure you avoid all those unnecessary costs. So be aware of those deadlines and how much is needed to make in terms of a payment. And that also goes for any loans, if anything's been taken out, whether it's financial aid, etc., or even rental. If your child is going to a university and they're not staying at home, make sure all the deposits are paid early, rent is paid early, so you're not paying any fines. And then also don't act too late on the small things like textbooks and supplies. Often what happens is if you can prepare and be ready, normally you can find good deals like second-hand textbooks. Whereas if you wait too late and all the second-hand textbooks are gone, then you're forced to go and buy brand new, which we know is a lot more expensive. And then on the flip side, to be financially ready for that next phase, it's to make sure all the downsides are also covered. As parents, make sure the medical aid and gap cover is in place. All your risk insurances are there as well, and you have an emergency fund tucked away as well. So if there are any of those unexpected emergencies that arise, it doesn't derail the plan that you've spent years putting in place for tertiary education.
Devin, as we wrap up, how can parents adapt their financial plan if circumstances change significantly within the 2-year timeframe?
Oh, I think that question almost sums up everything we've chatted about here. As financial planners, we're always telling our clients it's great to sit here today and plan what the next 2, 5, 10, 20, 50 years look like. But we can tell with relative certainty that things are going to change. But it's important to understand that you can't plan for every eventuality. So once you have the framework of your plan in place, where you know where you want to go, but you also have the potential risks covered, as I mentioned earlier, like have all those risk insurances in place and medical aid, and have an emergency fund. So when an event happens, and I can, as an example, something happens to one of the parents, and there's an accident, and there's either a loss in the family or a loss of income due to disability. If we've done the planning properly, that should all be accounted for and all covered. So, it's important to engage with your financial advisor because your advisor will make sure that all your goals, whether they're short, medium, or long term, are built into your overall financial portfolio. So, yes, it's planning and engaging with a financial professional to ensure that, one, you can meet your goals, and two, you can also continue to live the lifestyle you want to live and have your kids go to varsity if there is one of these unfortunate, unexpected changes.
Thank you so much for joining us on this episode, Devin.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
That was Devin Card, who is a certified financial planner at Crew Invest.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Money Rules Podcast. To listen to more, go to moneyweb.co.za or the Moneyweb app and follow Moneyweb News for daily updates. Money Rules. Moneyweb, your trusted source for business and investment insights.